we just, you had asked us to clarify Article 12. So this is clarification, plus we added in the sexual harassment language. We can look at that before we move forward.
Yeah, I honestly, I did not clarify F beyond the original language that's folded in the sexual harassment protection in the bottom.
Oh, so you didn't change?
I did not change that at all yet.
Oh, okay, so that still needs to be updated.
I had 5 o'clock on my calendar. I was gonna go through something.
Right. All right, so it's just sexual harassment language. Still needs to be clarified, I'll write that down, so I don't forget.
So let me, so maybe you could just tell us what it was again.
It was the, in Article 12, where we were asking for support for a teacher who's assaulted, and you wanted to clarify what that support would look like.
So number 2 is what you're proposing.
But no, actually, number 2 was the sexual harassment language that we had from PCTA bargaining. It's the exact same thing we proposed for both sides. And I had folded it under Article 12. And simply a logistics problem. I had the wrong time in my calendar today. I thought we were at 5 and not 3:30, so I got caught.
Okay, so tell me what, I'm so sorry, so.
F is going to be clarified.
F is the one that
So
was,
F?
one
Yes.
F, is- you guys had asked for clarification, and that's not done yet, so.
So
F,
the language that you put in for sexual harassment is not what we addressed in PESPA. You took what you sent, but that is not what, you weren't there, Lindsay and Nellie were, so this language is not what we,
All right.
So, yeah, so
Sorry.
probably, yeah.
I think it doesn't it just add to what Pespa's language was? Isn't A what Pespa?
I don't
No.
have it, no, and I don't.
A is not what PESPA has classifications that are not included.
I'll take a look.
Yeah, no, it's different. This is what you
We'll
had
just-
sent over via email, Brian,
Right.
and then we
And
changed
we-
it, discussed it with Nellie and Lindsay, but we didn't include B, C, or D.
I might have it in here, because I folded it.
I'm sure probably.
I didn't bring Casper either with me, so I don't
No,
have
I
it.
didn't.
All right, we can come back to that.
We can clarify that one
Yeah,
later.
yeah, no, it's fine.
Okay, yeah, no issue.
No, it's fine.
That's right, yeah. So
Just before we begin, I'd just like to introduce Nicole Bellucci. She is our HR partner for high schools, filling in, taking minutes this afternoon as Jody is out for the next couple of days. So thanks for being here, Nicole. and
Thanks,
doing her
Nicole.
minutes. So, Nicole, this is everybody.
Hi, Nicole. I just want, when I first, right before I took over this office, there was something going back and forth, and Mike said to me, just call Dr. Galucci. And I was like, what? It's like, you're gonna need to give me more
than
information.
that, yeah, yeah.
I was like, that's the first time I've heard that name.
That name.
So, and that's what, I always remember that name, because it's the very first thing he told me.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, that's not helpful.
Uh,
I'll be a little more specific. So yes, I always remember that name, your name, for that reason. It's funny. All right. It's funny because I did have Pespa's language. I took it with me last time.
We had just proposed, we had done a counter just last week, so.
Yeah, because I thought I could just hand it to Brian. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I must have had it. It's in among these 1,000 papers.
Let me see where it lives on this.
Here it is.
Yeah.
So I think I'll just get us started a little bit, if we're ready to go.
Yep.
So I just want to go back to, we did at the very end, I believe, last week, presented some other options for, I had to put myself back where we were. We were at your building last week, so I'm always, where were we? Regarding salary, wanted to just ask if you had any questions, if you had any follow-up, if you had any further discussion at that, regarding that at this time.
I'm sorry, I thought I thought the ball was in y'all's court about the salary. We don't have another counter proposal.
And we provided that the couple times ago, Kevin had mentioned there are some different ways to utilize the 11 point
right.
whatever, and so we provided you with that. So Kevin was not here, so Kevin is here, so I figured we'd hit him first.
I'm sorry about that. I remember, I do remember that part of it. I guess I just didn't so much think of it as a counter proposal because it was really just moving money around in different directions. But I think the point that we're still sticking to is the idea that the increase needs to be more equitable for our veterans, and that I don't personally see another way of doing it yet. And y'all might have different ideas about doing it to affect that equity without some sort of salary supplement that doesn't then affect the whole rest of the formula, because as we know, that exponentially increases. So,
Okay, so that's where we're really still at opposite ends of that,
Yeah.
because again, we have the pot of money that is available, and that's why we, again, you had asked us to go back and think about that. You probably were asking us different things, but
And it's still the issue of the law as it relates to that, for salary supplement for longevity, does that violate the law, which it does, it doesn't, so.
we're kind of at the same point with that. Okay.
And then the other point too, I don't think we've really discussed, is in our agreement, we say that supplements are for extra work, additional responsibilities, not for length of time. So that's what our
Right,
contract
that's why it
says.
would have to be created, because it's there a supplement, I mean, it's not like a longevity supplement is a made up thing and it's a crazy idea. It's a very common thing in many organizations, not only education, but certainly throughout all of education. So it's not something that's out of the realm of possibility. And certainly most organizations value the people who stay in and show loyalty, and that is the way to do it.
another way you could, you can call it a lot of different things, as long as it stayed within the same same category for tax and retirement purposes, the salary supplement versus special
Madam
payment.
President, can I get a point of clarification? I just heard Lori, Ms. Dart say that supplements are for additional work, but yet the advanced degree is a supplement. So the paper master, specialist, and doctorate, that's not for additional work. So I'm just asking for a point of clarification.
Well, that's in the statute 10-12-22, advanced degree supplements. In our contract, Article 34, we have agreed, and that's what our language says, that it's the intent of the parties that supplements are paid for additional responsibilities requiring additional time during and after the school day. So that language is already something we've agreed to. I understand you're asking us to change that language, that we negotiate that out and change it. I just wanted to point out that we have already agreed it's for additional responsibilities, not for length of time with the organization.
That's actually a good note to put in place. And again, whether we wanted to look at that language differently or just call the payment something different, as long as it had the same material effect for people, it doesn't matter to me exactly what it's called. But if it fit more within the framework that we already have.
That's sort of a footnote to what Kevin mentioned, though. Whatever we call it,
Yeah.
it still is an adjustment. And that's the problem that we see from a statutory point of view.
All right. Do y'all have, and it's something that maybe we can both look at it when we come back to the table again, it's just to indicate where in the statute this would be considered unlawful. Because I don't, it's not in the statute, so I'm wondering if it's something, you might, I don't know. Obviously, the law is constructed of a number of parts, but I don't see it in the statute where this proposal would be unlawful.
Well, we're really circumventing the statute. That's what we're doing. So we're adding another column and we're making an adjustment. We're increasing a subset of people's salaries, which doesn't match what the statute says. The statute, the formula that's in there. We're just calling it something different. Whether you call it something different and moving it aside, and we understand what the stated purpose is, it's to avoid this formula. And we don't feel that we should be circumventing.
It's to supplement, the formula, it does, and that's one of the reasons why we didn't, and I know we'll go round and round about it.
Mhm.
But one of the reasons that we didn't try to make any other adjustments to the scale was because I understand how difficult it is. Once you make one adjustment, there's such an exponential effect, and that would blow the budget up so significantly that it would be extremely difficult to navigate. This is a way to keep that flat rate and still stay within the parameters of the statute, which does. So I mean, I just think, I guess it's, to me, if we had this saying, if we needed to call it something different, I think that's okay. Or if y'all had another idea as to how to do it. But I think that when you look at even the counter proposal from last week was really just, here's how you can give some people less in order to give some other people more, and that's really not what we're here to do. What we're here to do is to make sure that the increases are as equitable as possible, and really the only way to do that for our veterans is to add some sort of flat rate. Now, if you wanted to have some conversation about what that flat rate could be, I mean, certainly I understand it if you wanted to have a different proposal, but we haven't tried to challenge the formula.
Well, though, if you look at the formula, so let's just take the proposal that the increase amount is $14.95.
Mhm.
And then you have a purple column where we call an additional increase something else. We don't call it an increase, we call it a supplement.
Mhm.
So you add $14.95 and $12.50. So Kevin, you can do that math. That would be 26, 27.
You're almost there.
All right, close, 20, we'll go,
Let's say 28.
$2,800. So then under the formula, the increase would be $2,800. So we'd have to do 1.25% of that $2,800 to increase on the performance schedule. By calling it something different, we're trying to evade that formula. And that's the problem.
No, well, and again, I try not to presume anyone's intent. I know we all have different opinions on the legislature's intent. And I do think we have to walk a line between understanding what the intent of the intent of the legislators versus the intent of the law. And those two things are different. And so I know that we can get into the political question of the intent of the legislators, but what we have is the law. And this fits very squarely within law because, and I wonder if I made a mistake because I wanted to use the chart that the district had brought and extrapolate it out so that you could see how it affected every level of the scale and the percentage that was incurred, the percentage increase that was incurred by every level of the scale. Putting that column there was really for readability, but you could just as easily put it on a separate sheet of paper if that somehow dispelled this idea that it was adding to the formula, the 1.2, that somehow this would have to be figured in and then you have to add another 1.2 or multiply
It's an
by
adjustment
1.25%.
So we just
Yeah,
really
it's
are
going
seeing,
to-
yeah,
We're going to some page, so
yeah.
we'll-
Yeah, Bob, you take a cry.
Right, I know, and I see what everybody is saying, the thing is, there is nothing in the law that prevents us to negotiate a separate supplement that has nothing to do with the formula. There's absolutely nothing in the law that says that we can't do that. It's our constitutional right to negotiate things like that. And if the actual intent of the law is to is paying for performance, merit pay, then certainly it follows that intent that you can have a different supplement that rewards people who are also you've got more highly effectives in the veteran group, actually. And you're giving them for their time put in, especially since we're not seeing longevity
So I
happen at
understand,
the
I
lower
understand the
rate.
perspective.
So it's completely a separate thing that could have been negotiated at any time to prevent compression.
Our impediment is still language in the statute that says that whatever the highest increase is on the grandfather schedule, the performance is 125% of that. And that kind of hamstrings.
It's a very narrow reading of it, though, because the supplement would be considered separate and not salary. That's why you don't have to have
I
it
don't know
called.
if that's the case.
So you're asking that this be a recurring and added to the every year, correct? That amount. It's not a one-time bonus, right?
Well, no, I mean, certainly our preference would be that it would be going board so that people could count on it to the extent possible, but to the extent that any of this is recurring, and we negotiated this last year, we negotiated it the year before, it becomes a little harder every year, of course, because of mandate. This year in particular has become exceptionally difficult to negotiate because of the restrictions put down by the state, but we do negotiate it every year. And so if this is something that the district wanted to negotiate, then, and to bring, particularly if, as has been suggested, there was some sort of legal challenge to this practice, this long, well-established practice in the state of Florida in many districts, including some of our closest competitors. If we talk about, I hate to say it that way, but if we're talking about, keeping teachers in the classrooms, then certainly I think that could be something that the district could propose for negotiation every year, just like we negotiate salary. This scale looks different than it did last year. And I think that it's important to clarify as well, because of just recent, even since, that's what's tough about it, even since we were at the table last week, last week we talked about the fact that, and this was more in PESPA bargaining, but we had some discussion about it. And I know, we talked over the phone and, or Kevin Compton, there has been the state DOE really being compelled by the federal government has now opened up the window for applications, district applications under not ESSER 3, but the American Rescue Plan. Last week, they were due this Friday. And then as of Monday, we understand that deadline has now been properly extended to December 17th.
Right.
So we're having these ongoing discussions about how, and very clearly in both the statute and, or the federal law and the guidance around it, it's very clear that money can be used for salary supplements. It is properly to be used to value the people that are there, that are the most critical factor in mitigating that COVID slide, the whole point of it. And we're getting this straight across the board rejection of the idea that we can use these funds for that purpose, even though it is explicit in both the statute and the guidance.
I'm not disagreeing that it's allowable to use for that purpose. What I'm saying is that it's a recurring source of revenue. So if you commit to using that source of revenue, you're going to get to a point where you no longer have that money and you have to make a reduction of some sort.
Sure, and a budget is nothing if not your priorities in numerical and in currency form, in numerical form. So you make it a priority to manage that so that you can continue to value, again, the people over the programs. The programs don't mean anything without the people there to make it happen for the students. And so this unilateral rejection of the use of those funds in the way that they were specifically spelled out in statute and even specified in guidance, I don't see how we can argue anymore with the intent of the law on that. It's clear in the federal law. So when we have this unilateral denial and unilateral rejection of even conversation about how we could use those funds, and we see the plan being moved forward even faster than is required in the state of Florida, when now we have more time to bring those stakeholders back in a meaningful way and have these conversations as we've been pushing through the summer and the fall, that is a major concern. I get the philosophical difference, respectfully, I get the philosophical difference, but this isn't about philosophy, it's about people. And those conversations have to be had.
So I take exception with the constant reference to the value of people. I mean, I think this district does value its people. This district didn't have to give a bonus. This is not related to teachers. Didn't have to give a bonus to our non-instructional salary people, but we did. And we did that from general operating fund, not from ESSER funds. We continue to pay our people through the COVID when they stayed home, they didn't work. So I ask that you tone down the reference that we don't value our people, because I think this district does value its people. I know that there's some disagreements with language, between contract language, but really, at the end of the day, I believe that this district does value its people. We try to do the best we can for our people. We've been given constant raises now for the last 10 years, quite frankly, and not bad raises, where other districts have not done that. So, I'm not saying that the ESSER funding or the American Rescue funding is not allowable to be utilized for that purpose. But what I am saying is it's financially imprudent to use a non-recurring source of revenue for a recurring expense. And that's what that is. That's what that amounts to.
And I will also piggyback, Kevin, I did share the information that you had gathered about, I shared last time, sorry, I'll speak up, sorry. I did share the information about how we have over the years valued our most veteran teachers that are beyond 30 years. We have added that step increase to our salary schedule, which now puts them at almost $7,000 higher than at year 30 teacher. So again, to across the board say that we're not, if you're equating the difference in salary to our most veteran, we have been doing that, and that has been going on for 6 or 7 years because we're adding 36 to our step now. And I shared last week, some districts stop at 25, some stop at 30, and provide a much less increase where we're doing the.
We continue on to now 35, is not that we have a lot of 30 teachers, we have 146 of them. They're making $73,420.
Right.
So
So
we do have-
again, just to say across the board that we don't, I think we have to look at all those things that we have chosen to do and we've negotiated absolutely back and forth. But we've come to that understanding, again, of choices that we made moving forward.
Sure, and my intention, of course, was not to mean any offense. I try, as I've stated before, I really try not to read intent into these proceedings, to presume what's going on in someone else's discussions or someone else's head, because ultimately I do believe in the integrity of this process. And I've been really careful to frame this as not so much as our teachers not being valued, our veterans are not being valued, but this is a way to value them, not just in the dollar amount, but in the equity that has been clamped down on by the state and what we would argue is unconstitutional, but it's the statute we have to work with. So it's not a matter of there has not been historic value, but now we have a responsibility to make sure that that value shown is equitable, and it clearly is not.
Because if the belief is that this is going to continue, and Dr. Grego has expressed the belief that he believes it will continue, there's been, like I said, there's been all kinds of scuttlebutt among some Republicans who are not happy, who did not realize what it actually would do. And there will probably be discussion, but if this continues ongoing for the rest of the, ultimately, it will be an enormous slap in the face to the veteran teachers, because ultimately those people on the annual contracts will be making more. It might take 10 years, but they will be making a higher salary than someone who has worked 10 to 15 more years. That is something that we think we should get in front of, and we should be preparing for that kind of future.
I understand that, Nancy. I understand your position, but I also say that we have a statute currently that exists on the books that we have to comply with.
Sure.
And, I don't know that we can, I don't know that our board would take a recommendation from us that might or does in fact violate that statute.
Well, certainly if it's presented that way, like the
Well-
mask mandate was presented, it is.
I think that it's also when you're talking about when we're telling people that this is the pot we have to work with, we can adjust it so that people can, you can have fewer people, like more people getting a little bit less and some people getting a little bit more, but not ultimately change. So you have to sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul. It's difficult for our people to understand, and I rightfully so, when they can just as easily as they're watching this, just as easily tune into the school board meeting and watch yesterday a plan for over $190 million being passed through. We have our own questions about that, but okay, $190 million that under this application, in addition to, I think, $220 million last year under ESSER 2, and then
That's not accurate. That was 85 million.
85 million, okay. So we're still dealing with, we're closing in on $400 million over the last 2 years, and of course, this is proposal for the next 3, somehow arguing when that statute is very clear about what it can be used for, not just in the statute, but the guidelines, sitting here and saying, but this is the best we can do. It's just patently not, and that is, and again, there's choices, like you said, there's choices, but when our people see that the choice being made, that the choice is available, you can make this choice to afford this equity to our veterans, but there is a philosophical opposition to it, that's difficult for us to even explain to our people.
It's not, Lindsay, it's not the philosophical opposition. It's certainly correct your numbers. It's closer to $300 million, not $400 million that we've received in the last 2 years. from ESSER funding. So we see
190. Oh, you're right, sorry, I misspoke,
I know.
yeah.
It's only 100 million.
Yeah.
with
It's
that.
100 million, yeah.
What was the first pot? That was the smallest one, the first
The
pot?
first pot was CARES one, that was like $23 million. or so.
Yeah, that's right,
Yeah,
right.
And then
That
the
was,
second one was $85 million, which that's for two, of which we have, I think, $39 million were available to us last year. We
Right.
utilized.
Mm.
And then we have the $191 million from the
Sure.
American Rescue.
Still a pretty decent
My
chunk of change.
concern, as I stated on the phone last week for ESPA, is, I don't want to find the district in a situation, Nancy, I'll remind you, where we were with American Rescue. And I completely understand the allowability of it and the philosophical statement that, well, we can use this money for that. True, you can use money for anything you want to. The problem though is when you commit, and when you say a supplement, we'll call it a supplement. But when it becomes a recurring expense, we know that 2 years down, so let's say we committed $20 million of money to salaries this year. And that's, we have a 2-year window with this funding source. So of the $300 million roughly, we say that's going to spend, we're going to spend $40 million on that salary increase. Great, we can do that, yes. But then when that second year comes along, you got to sustain that now $40 million expense that you incurred, which is going to continue. And the position I'm trying to avoid is how do we do that without having to cut people? That's why it's not a wise use of money.
For a reduction in salary at that point.
Yeah.
We're not gonna take it away.
Of course, and that's what I want to avoid. We've been there. I mean, every district in the state of Florida was there when the American Rescue and Recovery Act of 2009 expired. Every district faced that significant clip. In addition to that, there was a significant downturn in the economy. So that's my philosophical difference. It's unwise to commit to a recurring expense from non-recurring funding, especially if it's to the magnitude that when you get to finally that end of that funding, you got to make significant funding reductions. That's my question.
Yeah, and it's
I'm not
certainly,
holding the money against my chest saying, no.
no, of course not. I know it's not gonna benefit you personally. It's certainly not an implication that any of you would benefit from it personally, or that any one person would benefit
But
from it
it's-
personally in a way that was
The issue is that we don't
inappropriate.
want to be sitting in the state room 2 years from now talking about how we're going to make up that $40 million.
And if we were in that room, having that conversation, we would be saying the same thing that we do now. You focus on the people versus the programs. If you looked at yesterday's proposal, it was so disproportionately stacked for technology and expansion of these resources that are not the people that it takes to make that work.
The technology really is for students for the most part.
Sure, I mean, yeah, it goes into the hands of the students, but without the support of not just the teachers, but all of our instructional and support personnel, it doesn't mean much. So I would again encourage when we think about this, non-recurring versus non-recurring funds, we think about it as how do we balance these priorities? And given the fact that we know that we have a massive infusion of cash into our district, it gives us, if nothing else, the time to figure out a way to implement this plan and make it sustainable by making adjustments that are not made on the backs of the people that are in those classes every day.
So 84% of our expenses are in people. So to make adjustments.
That's gonna be that way in
Well,
any
no,
school,
my
public
point
school
is when you
district.
say
Right,
to adjust
yeah.
the expenses,
right, as it should be. I mean,
Yeah.
that's.
So adjusting
Right, yeah.
expenditure priorities, if you have to adjust your expenditure priorities, it's gonna be people, and that's what we're trying to do.
It's always gonna be the most expensive. When you have a responsibility to care for children, it's always gonna be the
Right,
most
I
think-
expense.
In our, we've been saying, that, the programs, I mean, what came out of the pandemic, and I've said this before, was that it was the face-to-face kids in the room with the teachers doing face-to-face work. Those are the kids who did better. They had suffered less learning loss. I hate that phrase. They suffered, they didn't fall as far behind. It was all there. I mean, the successful school system is based on a successful staff. And a successful staff has to be a satisfied staff. They need to stay. You gotta have them in the buildings to do the work. We're seeing people leaving. There is a slow exodus, and and many of them are at the upper end, although it's kind of both ways. The new teachers are bailing as well. They don't stay used to be an average of 7 years. Now then it went down to an average of 5 years. Now that average is even dropping. And people are not staying. It's starting to be a revolving door. So I get that you want to make it appealing for people to come in, but the people who are coming in are attracted by the high beginning salary, which of course is attractive. and the working conditions and the fact that they see the salary does not grow in future years makes them leave. And that is why you have to have a whole different mindset to retain. The focus has been on attracting, but not on retaining. And we're not giving these people enough time to become the qualified educators that they will become if given enough time. The people who are already experienced and doing the work and have shown the loyalty are the ones getting the short shrift on this deal. And they're going to see it, and there will be more of them leaving. The problem is, the new teachers that come in need those veteran teachers. That's where they get most of their support, most of their training, most of their help. That is where it comes from. They are, not only are they valuable for what they do in the classroom, they are valuable because they mentor, whether they're officially a mentor or not, they mentor the young. And we know that that is the case. That is where, I know that is where most educators will say, that's where they got the most experience and the most improvement in practice came from watching teachers who had been doing it for a long time. They need to be valued for that. And if this continues and we don't do anything to initiate a way to balance the negativity of this, what this is suggesting, or demanding, we're going to see a collapse along the way, because people will simply not take that kind of disrespect from the people they work from. They expect it work for. It's just, that is my fear. And I do believe the level of educational excellence will go down, because they are the ones who are holding it up right now. And they are bringing up the new ones so that they can take over holding it up. I don't understand. I understand the intent, as people are saying that it's performance pay. It is illogical to me that you would create a system where the most valuable and the most loyal are given less. And I think that it will not have an effect on how they see themselves as professionals. I can't even begin to understand that thinking. And I know you didn't create the law,
Just follow it.
but there are ways, legitimate legal ways to do the right thing for the veteran teachers that do not circumvent the law. We are totally, it could be a COVID thing that we decided to negotiate those people who not only have been here for 15, 20, 25 years, but stuck it out through one of the worst times in education and did not walk away. And that's why this is the year you decided to initiate a longevity supplement or salary or whatever you want to name it. I couldn't care less if you call it Seymour. Actually, I kind of like that name. It's the right thing to do at the perfect time.
You're not asking for a non-recurring bonus, right?
We are saying we don't know whether it would need to be non-recurring. It's something that would be negotiated every year.
Well,
I'm saying,
is that a request that we consider a non-recurring bonus?
That's certainly a counter proposal that you could make, though I can tell you that a bonus is not the way that I want.
right, we don't want to call it a
framed.
bonus. We
For
can't call
tax
it a bonus.
purposes, it's not necessary, and it's not, that would have to be, it would have to be framed in a different way, but certainly if that was part of your counter proposal, we would consider it.
Why for tax purposes?
Sorry, bonuses are taxed at a higher rate.
No, they can, they don't have to be. If you're receiving regular pay, you get applied.
Well, that's why we could call it a special payment or something to that effect. I
Call
mean,
it
that's
something
okay.
that doesn't
No, I
get
mean,
overtaxed.
if you give somebody, if I give you a bonus and you're not receiving regular pay, yes, I have to tax it at 25% rate. But if I give you a bonus and you're being paid regularly, I can apply your regular tax withholding rates to that.
Gotcha. Well, I read it in the statute, but I wasn't sure if that would apply to this because of some of the restrictions about where it had to be how it started to pay out, like at what year it started to pay out and so forth. But if it was something that could, I think that it might meet the statutory. Well, no, I had some issues with the way that I saw it in statute. I wasn't sure that you could frame it that way. But if you could find a way, if you wanted to issue a counter proposal and call it a bonus for tax purposes and for retirement purposes, it had the same effect as a salary supplement.
Bonuses are not subject to the FRAS, anything like that.
Right, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to, that we propose it as a supplement, but again, a special payment would have the same effect. But that's certainly a counter proposal that we would consider, and given the fact that we do as a practice, or have as a practice, brought this back to the table and negotiated salaries every year, then I think that that's something that could be part of the discussion. The critical piece is that the discussion is actually happening, it's happening, and it's not just, there's not just it's not being stonewalled.
Well, I think we've been discussing this, but we've been trying to work through this, the language that has been presented in front of us. So I don't want people thinking that we have spent hours talking about this. And so we are trying to bring what we feel is following the statute and what is available for this group for the salaries. So again, I want to reiterate that we have.
I don't doubt that, Paul.
You know,
I don't
right.
doubt that you're having those conversations. I'm not questioning.
Well, no, we've been having
Yeah,
together.
whether it's here or
Yes.
no, I know.
So the
not just-
discussions have been happening, but the material of those discussions, the idea that there is some sort of hard pass on this massive amount of funding that is available when it comes down to, we just don't want to spend that, that's not true discussion. So I think when I say discussions about the logistics of it and the different views, absolutely we were talking about it, but when
Like, for
ultimately there's a
example,
hard
So
bar.
let me just say one thing, that my comment is not, we do not want to spend that, we're spending that money on what we believe is going to help our students. But also, I can't say this enough, my concern, my problem is, and if you're talking a bonus, but it's a different story. What our conversation has been to this point has been, in addition to the salary schedule, which I think has a couple of different problems. One, I think some statutory problems, which we talked about that enough. The other problem is the recurring expenditure from non-recurring sources of revenue. I don't know who's in drop, I don't know who's gonna be here, but I'm gonna be here in a few years. I don't want to be the guy sitting here as a CFO of a district that I have to cut 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. I've been there. I had to cut $80 million 1 year on expenses. And that affected people. And that's where I don't want to be. And that's what we have to be cautious of, both of us, your side and my side.
Exactly, of course.
We want to be in a reduction in force situation where we have to.
But for example, like, we don't know, and I don't know how much more it would take, like, I think you had estimated. But like, we've been asking, we know that, and why shouldn't you be reimbursed for the $1,000 bonus, by the way? Well, that many other districts that did the $1,000 bonus, that is being reimbursed by ESSER funds. So that was just a layout in most other places. Broward, definitely. I think I spoke to Anna about it first. And so that would be a replacement that you don't have to suffer that loss. And the insurance. I've asked repeatedly, how much do you think is going to be refunded? Because I know in Polk County, right next door, they refunded so much that it went from like a 8% increase in insurance down to like a 1% increase, because so much of those costs were COVID related. And they met the, and they.
But your unit has 0% increase in insurance.
Because you're paying 9 million out of the supposed our pot. When the money is reimbursed for the COVID costs, that will be at least half, probably more. So let's say 5 million will come back. That 5 million or whatever amount comes back should go back into this pot, because that's where it came out of. And there's the money right there, not non-recurring.
No, that is not correct. If that money comes back to reimburse us from, let's just use round numbers. Let's say $9 million is what my insurance increase was, which is what it was. Let's say they give me $4 million back. Right? I get that this year. I don't get that next year. That $9
Still
million
has gone
continue to
down.
get next year.
Right, but it still came out of the pot. It came out of the pot.
It's a
Either-
non-recurring source of revenue. Once again, I'm gonna get it this year. I'm gonna get the $4 million. It's gonna help this year's problem. It's gonna take my $9 million down to 5.
Well, and it
But
can be
next
allocated.
year it's gonna go back up to 9. We're gonna come up with that $4 million that I just got back.
And we would have, I believe, unless you have statutory language that suggests otherwise, that very same process could be allocated or could be managed within the 190 million over the next 3 years. I mean, that the law, and
What
I
happens
think
every 3 years? Now you're talking, remember it's got a
you
compound.
make
effect.
preparation now with those funds, when we know
So
that
let's say
the
it's $10
plan
million
is.
a year over 3 years. That's now $12 million. So now 3 years from now, I'm gonna come up with whatever whatever the insurance increase is that year. Let's say it's $10 million plus the 12 million that I supplement.
So when we talk about non-recurring, I think it's important to distinguish the fact that, for example, and we've talked about this as well, that even though the statutory requirement is 3% for the reserve in Florida, we have a local board policy of 5%. And generally, that's been budgeted anywhere between 4 and 6% has been the actual yield in most recent years. This year, we're close to 10%. That, again, it's using those funds.
Wait, I don't want to, I mean, I know you guys.
I know, and
But let me just say this one thing. It's close to 10% because of the $30 million reserve from ESSER. That's why it's there.
Right.
And that's to prevent the cliff.
I would argue the very same thing. That's why it is there. The reserve is not there to serve as a piggy bank. It is, at best, it's a holding tank. And it's meant to cover these kind of things.
It's not a piggy bank. And even if we were to use that, again, it's a non-recurring source of funding.
But it allows you to budget with more understanding of what
So
it would
let's
look
say-
like
let's-
after that
Let's
fiscal flip.
follow the logic. Okay,
That's-
I'll
that's
say,
the
you know what,
term.
you're right. I'm gonna add $30 million to salaries this year. I'm gonna increase all teacher salaries by 30 plus the 15 that we're giving us. That's $45 million going up next year. Next year comes along, I no longer have that reserve. I spent it, right? So now how do I make up that difference of $30 million that I've already spent? How do I continue those salaries? I have to reduce salaries next year. That's the only way to do it.
I would disagree when you look at the projection of these, when you look at that $190 million, and a fraction of it was set aside for operations. It was almost, now there was a set aside for student support that could reasonably be inferred it's possible that could potentially be used for some of our, and should be, for our student support personnel. But as wonderful as these ideas are, they are programs that don't work without people. And the vast majority, I hate to use a term like that, but because it's so cliche, but it's true in this situation. The vast majority of those funds are being allocated for programs that don't work without the people to make them work. They don't, we can have conversations about the magic of learning and all of that stuff. The reality is you have to have qualified, excellent educators in front of kids before any of that's going to make any difference. I would argue that the allocation, that the priorities are off. And that's not, I know we don't have direct control over that. We have raised some questions about the fact that those discussions are meaningful and that they've been happening with Fidelity. And now we've got this plan that, we're working on trying to maybe bring that back in, and let's have these discussions about what we can actually use those funds for. That, a laptop's gonna be outdated in a couple of years, but you investing in an educator, they're gonna give their career to you. That's where those funds should be invested. And it does allow us for ongoing budgeting. If we know what we're gonna have to make up in several years' time, you adjust your priorities to take care of the people, because they're the part that matter. And I know that because we're far apart on this, we don't want to take away from some of the, I know we wanted to finish up going through some of the articles here, but that is another way to show that value to people: autonomy, respect, safety.
Because our last conversation about the ESSER funds was back in June, and that was pre Delta variant, pre all the
Shortage.
the teacher shortage and all of these things that just came out of nowhere to smack everybody in the face when we all thought that we were done and we're ready to move forward. And yet every time we asked questions or tried to have input, it just never really, actually the last time we asked, we were told, we don't even know if we're getting that money.
We didn't.
And well, but preparations
We're
were
getting some
preparations were still ongoing in the assumption that you would get the money, because that was talked about at the school board meeting. And yet we weren't involved in any of those conversations. We have not even seen the final plan. So we would have no idea whether our ideas way back in June were reflected anywhere in the agreement. It's all of that together is not what is indicated in the guidance that comes with the money. It was supposed to be meaningful discussions, which would indicate not just one, And as you go, and especially when conditions change so drastically. I haven't seen the finalized plan. I don't know what the finalized plan looks like, so I don't even know the suggestions we made almost 6 months ago are even reflected there.
The suggestions that we made cannot be in place if what we're being told is that none of those funds can be used for people.
Right, because I definitely, some of the things we said.
I
And-
think you guys need to move
Yeah,
on.
we need to get going.
To
But
say- to
I
say-
just-
to make the comment that none of those funds will be used for people is inaccurate, because
No.
they're being used for people.
We didn't say none of those funds.
That's
I
what
actually just
said.
did, but that's what I'm saying, if you're talking about not the 190 million is, if we're gonna classify that as non-recurring, the budget that's within that proposal that we saw for that 190 million plus. Is that what you're saying, is that none of those funds cannot be used for non-recurring expenses like what we're negotiating? My understanding has been that that's what you've been maintaining, that those non-recurring funds cannot be used for recurring expenses. But
I'm not, no,
No, but you know what else is non-recurring? Those laptops we're giving away to kids who don't want them. Some families are deliriously happy to get them. A lot of parents don't want them. They don't want them, either they have their own and they don't want the school offer and or they don't want the responsibility. The forcing people to take these things when they don't want them. And what were the losses from what was given out last year? We have no idea, we don't know anything about, we don't, I'm sure you guys do. But we don't know the loss, but there was
so
loss.
you know that was a huge concern of mine, but it wasn't as much as what it was.
But it was, you're still, those are things that you're spending a lot of money on and giving away, and they could just be lost and not return and not have, and then you'd have to do it again. That would be recurring, something you have to do on a recurring basis. Granted, not everybody is going to lose them or destroy them, break them, whatever, kids are kids. It's, but it's, and it's the programs. Not just the technology, but the programs that are, we can't even think of all the names of them. There are so many now that are being demanded to be used in the classroom. Those are expensive. Those programs cost a lot, and the kids don't respond very well to them. I know that they hated when we were virtual and I had to use those programs because there really were no other options. They absolutely hated that time in class because they wanted, and then these are kids who were totally enjoying our time in class where I used virtual programs or computer programs very minimally, because I don't believe in teaching a child in front of a screen. And they didn't do as well in that last quarter as they had done all along. Certainly not the same creativity, certainly not. And they don't like them either. The teachers aren't nuts about them. They're a wonderful resource. They're a tool. You don't need 1,000 of them. You don't need all these different programs that cost so much money. All you need is a darn good teacher in the classroom who can reach out to these tools that are provided on occasion to break up the day for the kids. That's what you need. The most of the focus needs to be on the person facilitating all of it. That's the authority, that's the expert, that's the educational expert. And that's worth paying for. So we did discuss some of those things back in the June meeting. But again, also, just so much has happened since then. So all we're saying is that there needs to be more discussion, more meaningful discussion about before the plan is submitted.
All right, and I'm going to, there is no good segue into that part of my language. I kind of found a couple spots in there that I probably could interject, but I was just not gonna interject. So we're just gonna stop.
And now
move.
for our next time.
You kind of just admit when you're gonna fail
Just
that,
don't
fail
figure
that,
it
yeah, so.
We're doing this on the top.
For something, what did
No, for something completely.
No, for something completely.
There you go, that was a good one, thanks. So, all right, so I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we had left off just after Article 19 last week.
Right, so this should be a barrel of lamb.
So
Maybe not so completely different.
So we, we had received and we've been talking about terminal pay. So Article 20 is terminal pay. So,
CC.
okay. And I don't, sorry, Nicole, I don't have a copy for you. So I know that you had presented, we have actually, our counter did not include any of it. However, we do recognize that this is probably a topic of conversation that needs to continue. We had in your proposal had some adjustments in just language in section A. You had adjusted the retirement numbers, had added resignation. Again, we recognize that this is a budgetary issue, but it is also part of the bigger package with language and so forth. I would like to propose that we skip this one for now and we come back to when we kind of get through more of the language and more of the discussions moving forward.
If I could just add, when we talked about this, 2 years ago, and we added the final paragraph,
Yes.
which we have deleted, we did look at, Kevin did have a study, and the proposal was that payout would occur on resignation and it would start immediately. And we concluded that that was not something that was financially feasible, given the financial impact of that. But there are things that could be done, not consistent with what your proposal is. Anything that we would consider would have to be moving forward and something we can budget for. And we could consider changing the formula because it is stricter than the statute, than 10-12-61. The proposal that you gave is not consistent with the statute, so it isn't possible. But between those two parameters, there is some room for revision. We just don't have that, and we would consider it as part of an entire package to when we settled this whole thing. So we wouldn't consider just terminal pay. We would want that to be, we think that's a major concession. And just sort of looking at the numbers, what the statute says is at 6 years, the most that can be paid out is 40%. At 9 years, the most that can be paid out is 45%. At 12 years, 50%, and at 13 years, 100%. We're stricter than that. So we realize that. And we would need to look at the parameters and the ages and sort of try to quantify, and anything we would need, any agreement would have to be going forward. And we checked into, Kevin, you checked into an ability to kind of isolate going forward versus the amounts that are.
So if we had made a change with prospective change, it'd be easier to budget for going forward. So there's some, to Lori's point, there's some room between you all with your proposal, right now it's language.
I can understand wanting to sort of pull this out and address it as a separate thing because of the salary implications, but can you give me an idea of what you're talking about when you mean perspective?
So like if we made a change, rather than saying anybody who has accumulated retirement up till now can get, I don't know, I honestly don't know.
Well, I think it would be time earned
Yeah.
after this date would be
Following the new
under a revised
Yeah,
formula.
and that was really kind of when we were trying to consider if it was available for termination. So we really have to consider what.
I got you.
But we have how much, 60 million, 90,
It's close to $100 million.
$100 million of
And
a,
we spend right now, then we just hear estimation, anywhere from $8 to $13 million every year for what we pay out in terms of that. So, if we were to make a massive change and increase that number, obviously that puts pressure on what's available for salary. So
Okay.
the question is, do you want to get plenty of people walking in the door? Or you want to get people continue working? That's the fine balance.
Okay.
So,
All right, so we can discuss it separately. I can tell you, it would be difficult for us to agree to anything that put our veterans right now at a disadvantage in terms of, in terms of that payout, but so that might just be something we need to think about moving
They,
forward,
they
but.
really aren't at a disadvantage. I mean, when you say veterans, most of those folks are vested in FRS and they could retire for the most part. And there's also the opportunity that, they're not in the defined benefit plan, in the investment plan, and that gives them the ability to get some concessions for terminal pay once if they switch into that plan anyway. It's all hinged upon retirement. And that's
Madam
the-
President, we have a clarification question.
Sure.
Yes, I was just wondering if we could go back to the date that the statute actually changed to 13 was 100% payout, and figure out how much money the district has saved over that time, not paying out the 100%, and then try to deduct that from our reserves to go ahead and put into this.
Well, when we say the statute allows it, it doesn't mandate it.
No.
And so we've had negotiated this. And so that this is what we negotiated. Now, the 65% is wrong.
Well, we're consistent, to Lori's point, we're consistent with what the agreement was. We paid out our terminal pay consistent with what's been in the agreement. So the fact that the statute says you pay 100%.
And was it
isn't
equitable
relevant.
that entire time?
I'm sorry?
Was it equitable to our employees? Is my question.
Well, it doesn't, it's not really relevant because one doesn't match the other, because the statute, just because it allows you to go to 100%.
Then
we're
we
not-
disagree on that.
And I guess I also have another point of clarification, that I need understanding on, because as I accrue sick leave, it is my understanding that that is part of my benefit package. And so what the district is saying, what I hear you saying, for clarification, is that you're hedging your bets that I'm not gonna use it all, and I'm gonna retire and not take it. And so what are you doing with, what happens if I did take it all, you have to pay me, but if I don't, then you just get to keep it. So where's that?
I'm not following your question.
If I have earned, I have been back in the district for less than 14 years.
Mhm.
So if I were to retire right now, I would only get 65% of what I have already earned. Like, it's my sick time, I have earned that, that's part of my benefit package. But yet you would only pay me out for 65% of it.
Well, actually 45, because that's what the statute says, but
There's a
the
statute-
65 is incorrect.
we're-
And when, I just want to clarify, when you say the districts, this is negotiated and it's been in here a long time. And the idea was to incentivize people to stay. So, and to keep accrue their sick time
Is it
for
working?
times like, well, I'll tell you, I'll tell you what, it certainly helps.
May I ask that question?
I mean,
Wait a minute.
It's working.
It was working.
Nancy, it's working to the level of $90 million in accrued sick time.
And let me
was
just add,
working.
during COVID, it certainly did help for those who had accrued sick time, that after they exhausted their COVID sick leave, they had things to rely on. It also helps people who keep their sick days if they have to go out on FMLA and some illness, that they are continuing to be
They get
paid.
paid.
That's
Yes,
why
and
there's an
that is all-
incentive, and that's
Yeah.
why we agreed to that. None of us were here when we agreed to that, because this has been in the contract for years and years and years. So it's not the district doing this, it was an agreement for a reason.
But I'm still trying to get a point of clarification, and I'm sorry, because the district is obviously putting money aside for this in case we have to use it. And then if we don't use it, where's that money going? Isn't that money going to a reserve pot to hold?
No. No, I mean, using sick time, if you use sick time, I mean, it doesn't really cost the district what the value of that sick time is, right? I mean, if you take a day off today, I don't have to pay somebody to take that day off, other than the substitute teacher I have to put in your classroom. So it's really, we're allowing you to carry that sick time forward year after year after year. Some districts don't do that. Or not, or just lose it. And so if you accumulate it, it's kind of a reward for you for having been present many days at work. And so now we're saying, okay, you accumulated this much sick time, you didn't use it, so we're gonna pay you this value for that. And there's no obligation for a district to that. The statute allows for it, the statute doesn't require it. So to Lori's point, years ago, whenever that was, the district and the union came to an agreement as to how we would pay our sick leave. And the percentages are inconsistent because the statute has changed many times over the course of the year, and we probably didn't change our agreement with that.
Mhm.
Right,
You know, so
Mhm.
Lori's point, you mentioned, Juliana, 45%, around 60% is what's in our agreement, but the statute says 45%. So we're really over and above the statute. We're violating the statute right now. So we really kind of need to get.
Yeah,
that.
because the
Yeah.
opportunity to
Yeah.
revisit that with, if it's a number of problems on both sides.
But so now there's
Again,
about 13 million each year, right, that gets paid out?
Anywhere from 9 to 13 million, depending on the year. I mean, if you have a big year where a lot of people really drop, that's gonna be a big number. Like year 2003, it was like 13 million.
right.
After the statute changed, where the drop provisions changed, percentages changed, we had a big bump on that year, so we had like 13.
Right.
So it just depends. It's a big number. It's not a small number every year.
But it's also, I mean, like, it's also an incentive it incentivizes attendance if you make it something that's doable, that's seeable. I mean, like, and for mostly people, I mean, like, well, even for me, I never had, now I'm on my way out, but it's just,
No, not yet.
Damn it. I keep trying to sneak out.
You keep trying to make me feel.
I always knew I wasn't gonna ever get 100% because I came into teaching, I started teaching, I was 40 years old in New York. And then I moved here and continued teaching. So I was never gonna work at 30. I wasn't gonna work, I think I was 42. I was not working until I was 72 years old. I knew that. I was like, no way am I gonna be 72 in a classroom. They're gonna lock me in the closet, and no one will ever see me again. I'll be like, let me out. So I said, no, it's not. I had these visions. But, so I always took the attitude that saving my sick days wasn't a big, it wasn't a big deal. Like, it just wasn't a big deal. And so I would just use them all, whenever, if I needed it, I would just use it. I wouldn't give it a second thought, instead of saying, this is worth money to me. I just think that when you make it something, I just think it also incentivizes good attendance, even for people who may not hit 30 years.
So we agree
Yeah,
that
great.
this is time to reconsider
Yeah.
this. It's
Okay.
just, there's a cost to it. And we agree that it is a benefit that would, people would find meaningful. We just have to
Absolutely.
figure out
Sure.
how to do
How
it.
do it? And you answered my question before I asked it. I was gonna ask about the study from that last paragraph, and you
Mhm.
answered it before I even got to ask it.
Mhm.
Look at that. Really. I'm in a weird mood today. This may not, I don't know what happened.
Okay, so on Article 21, teacher assignments, we had just a couple of I don't know, concerns, just we heard you back in July talk about the language that you had added, and I've got yours right here. So the Article 21 you had added every attempt shall be made to honor those preferences in the first one. Do you all have your copy right in front of you? Okay, sorry. So, we just have, we just didn't, again, that's every attempt shall be made to honor those preferences. It's just every attempt. What does that mean? And so forth. The other one in B, it talks about that again, this article references when changes are necessitated for changes in teacher assignments. And if that's going to impact the teacher, that they should be notified and so forth, and go through that. Talks about the principals who are aware that significant changes shall notify those affected teachers. And then you had added, if the changes must be made during preschool, the FTE count, so I'm thinking the time around FTE count, or other situations, I'm not sure what other situations, any teacher being moved from their classroom to another grade subject will be allowed at least 3 days to make that change. So again, we talked, I think this kind of tied almost into the discussion we had last week regarding transfers, and that at schools, again, we talk about availability for teachers to have the days. I really think that that can be, that is handled at the school level. I'm not sure it needs to be stated in here. The written rationale for an assignment being changed will be provided by the administration when requested by the teacher in writing. I think you're kind of using some of the similar language we have when somewhere else in the book. Again, these are situations when they arise to changes that, again, the administrators are the ones who are responsible for, making those assignments when that happens. I don't know, Laura, if you had anything further on that one.
Just that the principal needs the authority to do the master schedule, and language like every attempt will be made to honor those preferences. That's kind of like the language in the second paragraph that says, people will be given first consideration, and we're interpreting that to mean will automatically be placed, and we do not want to get in a situation where we are.
Wait, I'm sorry, where are you referring to?
Well, things like first paragraph, where every attempt shall be made to honor those preferences. So
Right,
if
but
a-
we're seeing a drift away. This is what,
Right.
it used to be, you didn't get everything always that you requested, but you would at least get one, you would get something. And maybe they would ask, but we need you to do this, but what we're seeing now a lot is that, more often than not, people are not getting anything that they've requested, like totally different things than they've requested. So that's what what spurred this thought, was because that has not always been the case. It was always much, because it was much more, the department chairs would basically make the schedule for the department, at least at the high school level and probably middle school. They would create the schedule for their department. And then, of course, it would move to the, I forget what the title is, it's not the principal. APC, thank you. And they would then coordinate all of these from the department chairs. And sometimes it worked great, and sometimes it just didn't. So that's where sometimes changes had to be a little bit made and said, okay, can we take this away from you and put that seemed to work. People were pretty okay with that, because it was a conversation. Everybody understood the reason why. And, but now what we're getting is the department chairs don't even do it anymore. They don't work with their people anymore to see and to try to at least formulate that schedule. And it's just going straight to the APC, thrown into a computer, and whatever works most conveniently, that's what you get. And it's turning out people aren't getting anything that they really wanted to teach. So it's just changed so much that we thought, and we can say it a different way if to clarify what I'm trying to get across, but there needs to be some attempt to let teachers teach what they want to teach, if it's doable in the schedule, because you got a happier teacher when they're teaching what they like, what they love to teach. Of course, it's just, of course, that's the case. I asked for, different classes all the time, and always got the same classes over and over, because I was very, very good at those classes, and my numbers were propping up the school's grade. And I got that, and I took it, and I was like, okay. But after a while, it becomes tiresome, because you never get a chance to teach something that you'd like to teach and grow your skill. You just never get that chance.
So let me just, so a principal feels that the best position for a teacher is class X.
Mhm.
You want to teach class Y. What's the result? We're going to arbitrate over that, over which is the best. That is what we are avoiding. This is a principal's prerogative and the administration's prerogative. And we can't get to, you think I should be teaching.
So what exactly is the point of
Yeah.
putting your
Yeah,
preferences in?
exactly.
So that the,
Because it's
so
not
that the
happening.
principal can consider those options, but ultimately it's the principal
And there
who
were
determines how to
token.
fit the schedule.
There were
together.
absolutely years that, a year never went by, and again, I'm elementary, so I know it's a little different with all the steps and so forth there, but then never a year went by that something didn't surprise, like, I was like, oh, they want to teach this. Okay, so let me see if that's doable. And never, I mean, you'd think you know all your people. I thought I knew my people really well, but again, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what their who they're talking to and what interests they have, or whatever. And so that's the reason for that. And there were times that I was able to do it. There were other times I called them and said, you know what, I need you to hang here for another year.
Explain why.
Just like Nancy said too, she knew why, right? So I mean, yeah.
So that's what this protects, is when
What?
we talk about a principal having the principal feels
Where
that
does
this is
that-
the best possible.
Oh,
They
you're
wanna
talking
add a
about the
written
rationale.
Well, it's B and also
Right.
ties into H, but it's not that this is saying that if a teacher has an issue with their teaching assignment, that they have control of necessarily complete control of the teaching assignment. But in addition to what Nancy was enumerating or explaining, we do have situations where people are, particularly with such broad language around involuntary transfer in this district, where people are pushed out, can be pushed out of a site by giving progressively more frustrating or progressively less consideration to their teaching assignment. And I don't even want to say less consideration or just straight targeting. And if a principal has a way to explain, like you said, the data should, like Nancy would be handed data and say, hey, but your student's performance in this class is so much higher. That's an understandable reason for putting someone in. But if a principal can't come up with a reason for the change, then I think it does trigger that idea. If they don't have a responsibility to explain that change or explain that rationale, then they can't then say that they're not making the change based on disciplinary or punitive reasons or discriminatory reasons. Holding a principal accountable for the justification for their decision, not to say that they have to issue a written report to every single teacher, but being able to answer that with accuracy and with integrity versus it's my prerogative, I can do what I want. That's not that's not the purpose of this agreement. The agreement is to add some accountability to avoid situations like that where someone is pushed out for discriminatory reasons. And I don't see any reason why we wouldn't want to add accountability language, particularly if ultimately, if they can provide that reasoning, their judgment is what's going to make the call.
Right, I mean, of course, the needs of the students are always, they're always the most important factor in putting together a schedule. I mean, and every teacher believes that as well. And if you sat a teacher down and said, you're just too damn good at this class and I can't let you out of it yet because we need your numbers. It would be hard pressed for the teacher will not feel bullied or pushed. They will feel validated.
And then they can
And
make a
then they
decision.
would, I know that's how I reacted to it when I didn't get the class I wanted 2 years ago. I was disappointed. I wanted to try something completely new and I really thought I would be good at it. And, they wanted me to just do the 10th grade English all day long because that is where the FSA, that's where you need your best people in those classes. And I said, well, can't I just give up one of those and do one period of something different? And he was like, no, I really need you to do all of them. And I was like, all right, because bottom line, what he was telling me is you're so good at your job. I need you to, how am I going to be angry really with him when you get that kind of a conversation? And that is all we're saying is every attempt should be made to give people, let teachers teach what they love because they're better at it when they love it. But if you can't, give them the reason why and try to uplift them with the reason why so that they're not feeling like they're just moving me around because they don't like me.
So I think, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think Dr. Galucci, who has been an APC at a high school and has a lot of experience in this area, would have some examples of times when the administrator has a feeling that this person is most appropriate in this class and the teacher does not necessarily agree. And the rationale is the principal's opinion that I know my school, I know my students, and this is where you would be best. What I see this setup is that you're now at logheads and we're going to be arguing whether the principal's judgment is appropriate. And the principal does have the prerogative to set the schedule for the school. And I'm sure you have examples of that.
Well, and the other thing too is that, over the years, and I've been in high schools in 2 different counties as an APC. And what we're seeing, and you talked about that, Nancy, is that you have a passion for something that you really want to teach, but as the era of accountability comes more and more and more, those courses that you love to teach have gone down. And so you see more of the intensive reading and you see more of the E2, and there's less of those elective classes. So those kids are being placed into classes based upon how they're performing. So you're right. They're going in and you press a button and you've got so many classes that you have to put students in, that passionate course of creative writing that you may have wanted to teach, we no longer can now teach that because you have to have so many sections of E2, or you have to have so many sections of intensive reading, or all these other courses that we have to service the kids, because you have to have those classes that you may not, really want to teach. But also then we run in, especially in the high school, is your certification. You have to have a reading certification. I only have so many teachers and I really need you in this class and I can't put you out of field. So there are all those parameters that you do run into that is I need you here, or I need you in biology, and biology may not be the one, and you want to teach anatomy, but we don't have enough anatomy. So there are all these things that do come into play that it does make it hard, or the kids didn't pick the class, because that was one thing I always heard as an EPC. Well, I wanted to teach the forensic science. Well, nobody picked, so you've
Those
been
are all
through.
very valid
I
reasons.
totally get that. It was an Avid class that I
It's,
wanted to teach, and our Avid program is blossoming and blooming. So it wasn't like a class that wasn't gonna be full.
Nancy,
But-
can I be back up for a second?
Yeah.
Dr. Galucci, you're right about all those things, because I've worked with our APC closely for years, but I'm just gonna say that loud. There's favoritism happening. That's what we're trying to avoid. How do we fix that is all I'm saying. I just want to know, how do can we do something in here to fix that? I agree with everything you said, certificate all those, but you can put all that
Yeah, I
aside,
get
it comes
that.
down to, let's say 3 people are the same. How can we avoid what over the past, I'd say 3 to 5 years has become more and more of that?
Well, or the opposite of favoritism and targeting and discrimination. And it sounds like you were very thoughtful in your work on that. But I think it also just, on high school, right? But just like Paula was mentioning, and our elementary teachers will say that you can have a passion for 5th grade that, and then next year you're proposed to change to kindergarten, to move to kindergarten. That could be super, super disruptive, particularly for our elementary teachers, with all the new materials. And high school teacher, this was my classroom. It looked a lot like this. Obviously, a 5th grade classroom or a kindergarten classroom would have a whole lot more colors and a whole lot more stuff. And that's a really important change and a significant change. But if a principal is able to offer that explanation, here's why, and show that there was thought put into it, that's one thing. It's I have a feeling that this is best, or this is what's best for students. Well, it might be best for students, but you have a responsibility to explain why this is best for students. And that's what this is meant to do, because otherwise our presumption would have to be that there is no data to support that, there is no reasoning to support it, and it could potentially have been made on discriminatory or on grounds or punitive grounds at the very least.
And the
Well,
other.
wait, there already is a provision that was put in several years ago. Change in assignment shall not be made for disciplinary or punitive reasons. You want to shift the burden and have the principal disprove your allegation that the assignment decision was made for
Why
punitive.
wouldn't the principal want to give the rationale?
They don't have to disprove it.
What
they
was,
just give
if
the
not to
rationale.
just, why wouldn't the principal want to give the rationale?
It's
I
still-
mean, what would be
I don't know.
the
What I put
reason,
in.
other than I can't give the rationale because I'm doing it because I don't like you? I mean, if it's a
You just want
legitimate.
to shift the burden to the principal to justify every decision that they make. And that's not something we're
No,
inclined to
only
do.
those that are,
No.
only those that are requested requested by the teacher in
That-
writing, which would certainly, we wouldn't presume that, I mean, I guess it could be asked for by every single teacher, but that's extremely unlikely. And the burden would shift back to the teacher if they didn't believe the rationale, if they felt like the rationale was insignificant, was insufficient, or if it was made up, or whatever, it wasn't accurate, then it does fall on them to show, here's the reasons why I believe this is discriminatory. But if a principal truly, or an administrator truly was thoughtful and had legitimate rationale for making a decision that was different from what the teacher felt was what they wanted to do, then it shouldn't be that much of a burden to just state the rationale.
Right, because if it's a burden to discuss with your teachers why you've made these decisions, then you're sending the message that you're just little soldiers for me to plug in place. You don't have any say. That is not the attitude that will give good performances. And that is what we're trying to avoid. The conversations take away those problems. They don't bring the problems. Conversation, good communication resolves issues. When I went years ago, before I was, it was still FCAT, I don't know what test it was on. And I got they gave me the lowest of the low, the very, very struggling students, and I had them all day long. And because I was good with them. And I went into the principal and in tears begged him to please give me some upper level classes because I'm starting to be a bad teacher. And I don't want to be a bad teacher. I'm burning out on never having anyone in my room who has the slightest motivation to work. It's just dragging me down. And I had seen, and I told
We're
him,
just tackling the higher.
I know, I get very emotional when I think about this, but because I had told him when I was a brand new teacher in New York, in Brooklyn, I heard teachers sitting around the table in the lounge saying, these are fucking kids and the kids are just brats. And, it was ugly to me to hear teachers speaking about children that way. And they were much older, they had been there for a million years, and I was 40, but still brand new to this. And all I kept thinking to myself is I never, ever, ever want to hear myself talk like that. Never. And when I thought I was going to reach that point, I begged, please give me something so that I don't become those people. And he did. And I said, even just for a couple of years, and then I'll take it back again. And I did. That conversation, which I still get really emotional over. He gave me his handkerchief. And my makeup. They do this, and he's like, no, really, it's yours. Just keep it, really.
Wow.
So I was like, oh, really? You don't want all this mascara? No.
So let me
I
just
mean,
ask.
that conversation, it made us closer. We trusted each other. He knew I would do my damnedest with the few honored classes he gave me, plus the ones I still had. Eventually, I took back more again, and I was ready and able to do it. That trust and working together and knowing when your teacher's at that point, and you've got to give them what they need, that strengthened our relationship. And that was John before Brett, and I had a wonderful relationship with Brett as well because of the conversations. But they're not happening in every building, and we want to encourage that. We really want to have language that encourages that collaboration so that the school gets what it needs, but the teacher also gets.
Let me
what
just
they
ask
need.
you a question as we talk about that, how it works. So the teacher that had the higher level class, that the other teacher that in your example you wanted, when that person is moved to a different class, because obviously you both can't teach it, so they lose the higher level class that they're teaching, what rationale would be acceptable to them when they say, why are you moving me out? Because the other person needs a chance to have this class? Is that not, I mean, that's a problem, isn't it?
It could be.
Okay.
He resolved it by putting me into the magnet program, so where there was
So
an.
that is a rationale.
Okay, but are we going to argue over whether the rationale is sufficient? I heard you say that if it's not a good rationale, if
But
you
we-
don't agree with the rationale, we're
Yeah,
gonna,
if it's not sufficient, if it's not based on
What's
thoughtfulness and based on.
Well, it was
based-
thoughtfulness because we're addressing Nancy's request to have a change in her schedule, which impacts,
Before,
again,
before
anything.
the schedules were created, it was
Right.
before the schedules.
So-
that's
No, it
when I
doesn't, right, it
approached
doesn't matter, it
right,
doesn't
right.
matter,
It
right?
sounds
It's
like what she's
assignments.
describing is more, what happened in her situation would be a more equitable solution. to
Well,
the
no, but
problem.
you're the one who had all honors classes.
Yes,
And now I'm going to tell you, Lindsay, that I think what Laura is getting at is now, Lindsay, you're going to take 3 of the classes that Nancy had, and Nancy is going to get 3 of your honors classes. So now you're requesting the rationale of why my assignment has changed.
I want the honors classes. You just moved me out.
Right. So
Why?
then,
Because you gave them to her.
and so I can give you the
I mean,
rationale that I gave them to Nancy because, but what happens if you're not in agreement with that?
if I'm not in agreement with it and I can't show that there is any,
You as the
any
teacher.
inappropriate
No,
reasoning.
you're the teacher.
No, I know, that's what I
Yeah.
mean.
Mhm.
That if what a principal says to me is, I had to
I
do
said it
it
to you.
to
I
reach
just
an
said it.
equitable, an equitable solution because this is what we're dealing with.
Okay.
I found that this was an equitable way to do
Then
it.
it's done.
If I disagree with it,
Mhm.
then if I don't have any other basis for showing that it was punitive or discriminatory, it was a legitimate
What if you
rationale for the
felt it
change.
was?
If I felt it was and I had proof of it somehow, then that would be something that I could bring under this challenge. And then it would, right, if I could bring under a challenge.
It
under the
is a little after 5 and Nancy, I know you have a
I
5:15
know.
back at your building, so I
Yeah.
don't want to hold you
No,
up for
yeah,
that. And I
it-
do have
it-
another
it
meeting.
worked
about that.
because obviously it worked. And there were
And it was
no
a
other
conversation
issues.
that, and I want to make sure it was understood that that was it was a conversation you had with your principal. and-
Yes,
Yes.
we're trying to encourage more of that.
Do you
That's what I've
have
been after all along.
an idea of how many, I mean, is this happening a lot that people don't get any kind of decision or any kind of class that they?
Depends on the department.
Yeah, it depends on, there's some schools that work very well with their teachers and have great and really do go
I
out
think
of their
Lori's
way.
asking about, do we have an idea of number, if it's.
Don't know.
Yeah, okay.
But do we hear a lot about it seasonally? I mean, I would think so. We're not hearing it now, of course, because of.
Oh, no, I
season.
understand. We're not- Yeah, we recognize that, yeah. All right. Our time has come.
Yeah. we gotta raise-
That's who they asked.